Hi, this is chapter 3 from The Professional Chef, 10th edition, and we're going to be covering basics of food science. I just wanted to come in here and create a quick PowerPoint and voiceover to kind of summarize some of these topics. I know that this chapter was a little wordy and it's essentially discussing chemistry, so I thought I could maybe summarize things into a more digestible form. The 6 basic principles of food science are heat transfer, caramelization and Maillard browning, gelation, denaturation, coagulation, and emulsification. Heat transfer. This is just talking about the act of cooking. Cooking is applying heat to foods to prepare them for eating. And when foods are cooked, there's changes in flavor, texture, aroma, color, and nutritional content. 4 different types. The book kind of labels it as 3, but I did include induction in there. So the first one we will cover is conduction, and then convection, radiation, and induction is in there as well. And as you can see, there are moments within the cooking process that all 3 of these, not necessarily induction is a special type, but these top 3 occur at the same time. So there's radiation coming from this open heat source. Radiation is coming away from that. There's convection, this circulation of hot and cooler molecules within the pot of water. And then conduction is showing that this metal handle is actually heating up because the pot itself is heating up, the water inside is heating up. So these do occur simultaneously, they don't necessarily stand alone. So for conduction, that is heat spreading through a cooking surface to a product. This is the most common method. This requires direct physical contact. And metals are a good conductor. So that's why we see a lot of metal cooking pans and pots and all that stuff. An example of conduction transfer is a flat top range heating the bottom of a pan and ultimately reaching the food and then cooking the food. And this is where I included induction because induction is a type of conduction method. This is when heat is transferred through a specially designed cooktop made of a smooth ceramic material over an induction coil. This creates a magnetic current that causes a metal pan on the cooktop to heat up quickly, but it does require specific equipment and other cookware will not work. You do have to make sure you have the correct pots or pans, and if you ever there's a quick way to notice if it's wrong. If you place a pot or pan that is not compatible with an induction burner, it kind of makes this high-pitched squeak. It's really, really loud. Well, to me, it's loud. It's really obvious if you're paying attention, and obviously in the end, the pan won't heat up. So that's how you'll know. As for convection, this is the transfer of heat through gases and liquids. This means that the food is in constant contact with heated gas or liquid. This can occur naturally, as in a pot of boiling water. That's the circulation of the cooler water molecules falling to the bottom of the pot, getting heated up, being pushed to the top, and then that creates this cycle of water molecules cooling down, reaching the top, being pushed down to the bottom by the other molecules that have heated up to the top, and then it just creates like a flow. And then this also occurs mechanically, and that's very easily seen in like a convection setting in an oven. So that's where this fan in the back of the oven will be on during the cooking process. So that means that it is circulating the hot air, and this typically cooks the food faster. You'll see a lot more browning this way, as opposed to just a regular bake setting, which is just the heat source from the oven heating up, and the air kind of ends up circulating itself, but not as aggressively as with a fan in the back of the oven assisting it. And radiation, this is a rapid transfer of energy through waves of electromagnetic energy. This does not require contact between the food and the other surface. And there are two types. There's infrared. This is invisible light wave energy. This gives off waves of radiant energy in all directions. So kind of like that pot we saw in the beginning, that open flame underneath it is actually giving off some radiation through infrared. This is the invisible light that we can't see. Dark, dull, or rough surfaces absorb radiant energy best. So, glowing coals or the heated coils of a broiler oven or electric toaster give off infrared energy. And everything that one product that we are very familiar with is the microwave. These transfer energy through short, high frequency waves that agitate water molecules in food. They can quickly penetrate several inches below the surface of the food. However, there are a few drawbacks to the microwave. You can only work in small batches. There tends to be a loss of moisture because the waves affect the water molecules in the food. And there's no caramelization or Maillard reaction that can happen with just the food and the microwave. There are special like foil lined trays that some frozen foods come with, like a frozen pizza might sit on a little tray that will react with the waves and become hotter than what the microwave actually produces. And that can help with some Maillard reaction. But if it's just food and it's just a microwave, don't expect any good caramelization coming from that. Metal in a microwave. I spent 99% of my life thinking that you can't stick any metal in a microwave, and I just recently learned that you can. So, since we're all here to learn about cooking, I thought this might be a quick, interesting video to watch. Walls and the mesh on the door. Then, of course, there are those crisper microwavable well, you should never metal in the microwave oven. People say it's true that it's slightly safer to put a spoon rather than a fork in the microwave. Microwaves themselves are a form of bounce off the oven's metal walls and are absorbed by water, fat, and sugar. Put metal in there, and the microwaves will cause the metals electrons sparks. Metal in the sparks flying. That means there's been a buildup of charged particles. These particles are pushed by a buildup of electricity arcs, resulting in the how does shape factor into this? Red charge and sparks. You don't even need metal to they'll spark too. But don't think we're encouraging you to all of your smooth metal along with last night's dinner. Just know that you can without causing a World War III level. Well, probably. I thought that was interesting. So, moving on. Now we're going to talk about what happens when we combine heat and sugar or starch. Caramelization is a process of heat and sugar combining, and those two items together generally make a thick syrup. And then, if you continue to cook that thick syrup, that is when you enter a caramel stage. Different sugars have different caramelization points. But for example, your standard granulated white melts at 320 degrees Fahrenheit and then starts to caramelize at 338 degrees. The Maillard reaction is the browning of food, so that nice crispy edge on like a smash burger or a steak that comes off the grill that has your nice grill marks. That is all due to the Maillard reaction. This involves sugars and amino acids reacting, and this requires a relatively high heat above 300 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's why microwaves can't achieve this alone. Chelation is starch and liquid and heat combining, and that results in individual starch granules swelling while they're absorbing the liquid. Starch, a complex carbohydrate, has a powerful thickening property. This occurs at different temperatures for different types of starch. And high levels of sugar or acid can actually inhibit gelation, but the presence of salt can promote it because salt is hydrophilic. It loves water. That is what encourages the product to absorb more of the liquid that it's around. Denaturing proteins and coagulation. So, at the molecular level, natural proteins are shaped like coils or springs. But if you combine a protein with heat, salt, or acid, you will start to denature the proteins. And this just means that the protein structures are uncoiling. And when you have denatured proteins sitting, they tend to coagulate. They tend to form bonds with each other. And then that actually creates like this solid lump. And that's why you can feel cooked meats becoming more firm the longer you cook them. And this is also why it's important to let meat rest before slicing. I'm not sure if you guys have heard that, but definitely like um, anything like a steak that is cooked not well done really, really benefits from this. It kind of think of like a resting meat like a sponge. It is so hot that it is still excreting its juices, but if you let it sit for 5 to 8 minutes, that the proteins are relaxing essentially and then are also reabsorbing some of that liquid during the cooling process. But proteins can overcoagulate if exposed to heat, salt, or acid for too long. This causes protein molecules to coagulate further, shrink, and toughen. I'm sure we've all had a really, really poorly cooked protein where it feels impossible to get through. That's probably what happened to it. As for the function of cooking fats, there's two different types. We have our solid saturated fats, so something like butter or ghee, and then liquid unsaturated fats are all of our oils. For the culinary functions, there's so many. Different fats can bring a rich taste, a silky mouthfeel, especially like in a sauce that you finish with butter. It can also enhance the appearance. It can make things light, fluffy, shiny. They also can emulsify and thicken. This helps to transfer heat and prevents from sticking so that you would see this in any kind of cooking pan that you're using. You always typically add oil. And in baking, this tends to tenderize, to leaven, moisture retention, and give a flaky texture, like in biscuits. And one other important information to learn about cooking fats is their smoke point. So this is when fat begins to break down and can actually develop like a bitter flavor that does translate into the food that you're cooking in this oil. So vegetable oils, smoke point, they do vary, but you can, and it's usually stated on the bottle. Vegetable oils are usually around 450 degrees Fahrenheit, but animal fats are lower, kind of around that 375-degree range. Moisture management. This is just a key point in cooking. This is understanding what happens when food cooks to achieve success and applying your technique. While moisture is escaping from an ingredient, care is taken to prevent the loss of flavor. So, this is why we're here. This is what we're learning about. We're learning proper methods and techniques and, like what to look out for and all the variables that are in cooking because it is important to know proper methods, and it's also important to understand how to improvise and to watch things and be able to adjust along the way. So this does require us to work quickly and diligently to avoid any issues and also know which appropriate method and equipment to use while you're cooking. A little note on the pH of food. So this is also something to consider. Consider the pigment, pH, cell density, vegetable structure, and cooking time when choosing a cooking method. So, for example, they talked about a couple different things. I just brought these two up to the front because I thought they were interesting. So, if you're working with any vegetable that has a lot of chlorophyll in it, that's anything that's green, with acid or excessive heat, the colors become drab, and I'm sure everyone's noticed this. If you add cilantro to hot rice, it turns like a browny, murky color. But if you add salt to, say, some blanching water for broccoli, that actually tends to make for a brighter color. And if you want a pro tip, if you are blanching and then shocking your broccoli, also salt that water. It helps with the flavor too. Anthocyanin is those purple pigments. This is something you'd find in like red cabbage. Acid counters alkaline liquids for brighter colors. So if you were to cook cabbage in an alkaline liquid, which water typically is, a touch of acid will actually counter that and preserve the color. And choosing the proper cooking method will help you control labor productivity, properly leverage equipment resources, lead to quality results, and even help retaining the nutrient quality of your product. So, all good things, everything to consider when you want to do the product some justice. And in forming emulsions, what are emulsions? Emulsions are when two substances that don't normally mix are forced into a mixture, and this is tends to be evenly dispersed throughout. We see this typically in sauces. Vinaigrettes are a huge, huge example. So, what you use to combine those two substances that don't want to stay together is you use an emulsifier, and that's an ingredient that attracts and holds both the oil and liquid together. And we've seen this in egg yolks. That would be like in a Caesar dressing. Mustard is such a solid go to. You don't need that much, so you don't end up tasting it. Pro tip, use a French mustard or Dijon mustard. If you use something like yellow mustard, you actually probably will end up tasting that. And you need a mustard that is processed. So grainy mustard does not have the same emulsification power as like Dijon mustard would. There's also glace de vinaigrette, natural starches, which are actually like sometimes found in garlic, and then modified starches like arrowroot or cornstarch. But those last two need heat applied to them for them to actually function. So we're going to watch a quick video on how to make a vinaigrette. And this is a very famous, well-known chef, old French chef that, he's great. So let's give him some of our attention. So he did mention the ratio that he used, 1 to 4, and I'd say that is a good uh, ratio to use to start off with. And then always, always, always taste and adjust. And pro tip, if you're dressing a salad, take a piece of the lettuce and dip it into the vinaigrette that you're making, because that is a better indicator than just on a spoon. You're not also eating the spoon. You do this so you can actually get a little sneak peek into what the actual finished product is going to taste like. And this is usually the biggest indicator of lack of seasoning. So salt, he does not add any sugar into his vinaigrettes. I'd say it is okay within moderation. You could do sugar or honey or agave syrup, but he does take a quick second to mention how pre-made store-bought dressings typically you have like a lot of sugar in them. So they are very, very easy to make. And I would encourage you guys all to try to do this at home and give it a shot if you have never done it before. Okay, we are coming to the end. So we're just going to talk about the process of low and slow cooking. This is something like if you've ever used a crock pot or a slow cooker, or if you've just put like a big chunk of meat in the oven with some, spices and liquid around it, you've done this before. This is typically used for tough cuts of meat that have a lot of connective tissue. You're usually cooking this at a lower temperature, so between the range of 200 and 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Cooking time does depend on the size, thickness of meat, type of meat, and all that good stuff. The science behind low and slow cooking revolves around a few key principles, and that is the breakdown of collagen, protein denaturation, and flavor and fat rendering. So, the breakdown of collagen. Collagen is a fibrous protein found in connective tissues that makes meat tough and chewy. This breaks down into gelatin when the meat maintains a temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And then when meat is cooked slowly at low temperatures, the collagen gradually converts into gelatin, resulting in a tender and succulent texture. So I'm thinking like pot roast or like a braised chicken that's like falling off the bone. Sounds so good. I'm so hungry. As for protein denaturation, this is when, we talked about this earlier. Proteins unwind and reassemble in a way that enhances the meat's juiciness and tenderness. And this usually happens between 140 and 180 degrees. And then for fat and flavor rendering, this is when this slow cooking kind of develops into its niche areas. So we have smoking or barbecuing. This is indirect heat with wood chips or charcoal, and this imparts a distinct smoky flavor. And smoking and barbecuing is a very, very long process. It is a labor of love. You really have to pay attention to your whole setup, if you have enough wood chips going, if you're at the right temperature. And it's really a very special art. Roasting is cooking in an oven at a low temperature for an extended period of time. And then we have braising. This is when typically you brown the meat first and then cook it in a liquid at a low temperature for an extended period, and often in a covered pot or just a covered container. And sous vide is definitely a newer technique that is becoming more and more popular. This is when food is vacuum sealed into an airtight bag and then cooked in a water bath at a precise temperature and for a long time. Cooking time depends on the protein that you have. And this is a process that would professionally require a HACCP plan. So a HACCP plan is something that we covered last week. And it's just because that there are a lot of room for error in this cooking technique. Something that you might see is like botulism if the temperature isn't maintained right. This can happen in so many different ways. So sous vide is really cool, and you just should be very well versed in how to do it so you do it correctly. And that's all we had for chapter 3. So thank you so much for getting through this with me. Hopefully, it makes a little more sense. I know that the book got a little wordy even for me, so I just thought a quick little PowerPoint would help. All right, guys, have a good week.